All right, check, 1, 2, that's working. Well, if you want to take a seat, we'll get rolling here in a minute. Okay, well, good morning. My name is Josh Butler. I am a pastor out in Phoenix area in Arizona. How's everybody doing? Good, excellent. Well, so great to be with you. Well, our neighborhood comes out at sunset. My family and I, we live near Hole in the Rock. It's a beautiful red rock formation in Phoenix, Arizona area. And during the day, that place is empty. I'll go out on a little midday hike sometimes and kind of go out there and nobody's there. But you come back a few hours later as the sun is going down, and that very location that was vacant of visitors a few hours earlier is now just flooded with lovers holding hands, with friends kind of chatting it up, walking around, with families and kids having a picnic and climbing up to the view. And the smell of a certain substance that's now legal in Arizona wafting through the air often, right? Point being, everybody comes out at sunset in our neighborhood, and my family and I, we have grown to love these sunset walks and going out to enjoy that time of day together. Question I want to ask you this morning is, why are sunsets beautiful? What is it about that moment when day and night collide that draws us out to gaze at their radiant splendor? Now, sure, we can scientifically dissect it, like light rays on sojourn from the sun kind of hit our atmosphere and scatter through the atmosphere until reaching our retina. And yet, to reduce it like this is to ravage it, to miss the glory and the splendor of what's happening. I want to introduce you to an ancient vision, more poetic in nature, a more romantic perspective of nature. Sunsets are beautiful, God says, for the same reason that sex is sacred. It's when the two become one. When day and night merge their diversity into union. Now today we're talking about the truth and lies about sex. We want to look at the truth and the lies about sex. Truth and lies is the theme of this conference this day today. And I want to show you how God has designed sex to reveal something about the truth of our world. God has actually designed sex to reveal something that is true and beautiful about the nature of the world that we live in. And one of the lies in our culture is that sex is just about personal pleasure, nothing more, where all that is needed is consent. I heard one kid in a Rolling Stone interview was being interviewed, a teenager, and he put it this way. He said, for us today, sex has simply become one piece of body touching another piece of body, just as existentially meaningless as kissing. This is a lesser vision of sex, not a greater one. The mystery has been lost because sex for us in our culture today, in this lie, sex no longer speaks to a greater reality in which we're found. And yet, the truth is that God has designed sex to point to greater things. He's designed it, we find in the gospel, God has designed sex to point to the nature of our salvation as union with Christ as the bride, with Christ as the groom, the union of Christ and his church. It's designed to display his covenant loyalty, his unfailing commitment to us, that Jesus is not going anywhere. He'll be with us through thick and thin. He's promised himself to us. Sex is designed to bear witness to the abundance of the kingdom, the fruitfulness that comes forth from our life in the Spirit, that we are born again, that we are made new, and that God brings abundance and new life and the fruits of his Spirit into the world, in us and through us, through our union with God. This talk is based off a chapter in a book that's coming out, my book, Beautiful Union, that'll be coming out in April. Where I'll look at a lot of these things and more, how sex is a window into the nature of salvation, into the abundance of God's kingdom, into the very identity of God as a communion of love. But the one that I want to focus on today is actually how sex is a window into the structure of creation. The structure of creation. That God has designed sex to be a window into the structure of creation. So let's jump in. Sex reveals something of the truth about our world. If we were to go to Genesis chapter 1, man and woman are introduced on the opening page of the Bible. Male and female, he created them, we read. What's often missed, however, is that man and woman are not the only such pair. They are this pair made with and for one another, and yet they are introduced within a constellation of patterns, a structure of creation, so to speak, that is ever present around us in our world. Genesis 1 introduces us to three major mated pairs. We have heaven and earth, land and sea, and night and day. So heaven and earth frame the vertical dimension of up and down. Land and sea frame the horizontal dimension of side to side, and night and day frame the temporal dimension of time. These three pairs structure creation, and guess where the most beautiful places in creation happen? Where the two become one. So God, first 3 days of creation, he separates these spaces. The second 3 days of creation, he fills them with life. Let's take a look at each of these pairs, and I want to start with land and sea. Let's start with land and sea, where the land and the sea come together. Now, rugged terrain and billowing waves, these are impressive all on their own, and yet there is something magical that happens when these two forces collide. As the philosopher Peter Kreeft puts it, he says, the shore is the most popular place on earth, he observes. Waterfront property is the most expensive property anywhere in the world because that's where the sea and the land meet. That is where man and woman meet. The land without the sea is kind of boring, desert. The sea without the land is kind of boring. When are we going to land the ship? But the place where they meet, that's where all the action is, and that's where we want to be. Now, I would push back on Kreeft's claim that these are boring on their own. The reality is there is a romantic beauty to the desert, and sailors write sonnets about the ocean, right? And yet, he's on to something, that there's just something about the beach. Its aesthetic is magnetic. We will shell out top dollar for the oceanfront view, whether on the sun-kissed beaches here in California or the rocky coasts of Ireland or the vacation resorts in Thailand, right? There's something magical about the beach. We are drawn to this merger like a magnet. Now, the coast is the largest example of this, where continents are tangling with their tectonic match with these oceanic bodies of water, and yet the magic works on smaller scales too. Cities are historically built along rivers. Cabins pop up around lakes. Oases sprout up in the desert. Where stream and soil collide are places where life emerges and comes forth. And not only where life emerges, but beauty does too. When river and rock caress, something majestic happens. What are waterfalls but water traversing rock? What is the Grand Canyon but rock carved out by water? As a buddy of mine, Brett McCracken, observes, that water and rock together are like nature's most artistic pairing, and we love to gather and congregate around the cathedral of their splendor. He says, whether glaciers or cascades, snow-capped mountains or geysers, the places where water and rock meet are where painters, photographers, tourists, and lovers flock. We're drawn to these intersections of land and sea. Like the union of man and woman, the mingling of their material elements is a mutually formative marriage. They shape one another and evoke wonder. Their convergence has the power to both form beauty and to generate life. It's at these edges where two different systems touch that diversity and productivity of life are massively higher. In permaculture, they call this the edge effect, where these two systems touch, how that's where life explodes. And we are right to congregate around them, to flock to these places and gaze in awe and wonder, for as Kreeft puts it, it's where the action is. Okay, well now let's move to day and night. The day and night. This is the next power combo of Genesis 1. Day and night, light and dark, and each of these are great on their own. Most of life happens under the sun. And there's just something about camping under a blanket full of stars. And yet, there is something mesmerizing that happens when they merge. The most popular moment of the day sunset and sunrise, and they are spellbinding for good reason. That's a good reason why my neighborhood comes out at sunset, right? Because when day and night meet up for their twice daily tryst, it's spellbinding. It's glorious. Now, this moment of union is analogous in a way to sex. This is the moment, sunset is the moment when the sphere of energizing light penetrates the border of the horizon and sinks into the womb of darkness, erupting forth in a volcanic explosion of colors streaming across the sky like sparks of euphoria flying from lovers in ecstatic embrace. Now, I don't want that to sound crude, but I'd suggest if it does, it could be because we have a crudified understanding of sex in our culture that has come to see it as simply about self-interest rather than a covenant pair bound with and for one another, like day and night, locked together in this moment where they come together, bringing their diversity into union. The point here is not to sexualize creation so much as it is rather to creationize sex, if you will. To see how sex fits within a true structure in the world that God has created, that he has placed us within. How it fits within this broader structure of creation and bears witness to its nature. Shakespeare saw the romance in Sunrise. In Romeo and Juliet, perhaps the most classic love scene in all of literature, the balcony scene. Romeo compares the arrival of Juliet to the breaking of dawn. He famously says, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. The master playwright, he has identified Romeo with the night who's having to sneak along in the cover of darkness. And then Juliet, he associates with the day. And now they're coming together, he sets against the context of sunrise, where they join hands and they pledge to marry. This timing is appropriate. The two lovers are coming together at the moment where the two become one, day and night. Okay, well, finally, let's move to our third pair from Genesis 1, heaven and earth. And here we come to the mountaintop. Now, ancient peoples looked to mountaintops as sacred space. This is where heaven and earth touched and came together. In the Bible, we see this as well, that Mount Zion sits atop Jerusalem, that Moses encounters God up on the top of Mount Sinai, that Elijah brings down fire on the prophets of Baal from God at the top of Mount Carmel, that Jesus is transformed into radiant glory on the Mount of Transfiguration, and that the Garden of Eden, Ezekiel tells us, sits upon the mountain of God. Mountaintops are sacred space in the Bible. The holiest encounters with divine glory occur there. Mountains are like Jimi Hendrix, right? They love to kiss the sky. Now, we still love the mountaintop today, too. I grew up in the shadow of Mount Hood, and she is glorious, visible for hundreds of miles around. This is a place where climbers go to ascend, where we go for retreats to kind of get away and get perspective and all. The mountaintop experience is a phrase that we use to refer to that place where we can get a sense of transcendence and perspective and clarity on life. Now, mountains are powerful in terms of like heaven and earth at one level here with literal creation. But at another level, heaven and earth in the Bible are about more than just soil and ozone, right? They are also used to speak to God's space and ours. Heaven is God's space and earth is our space. And so they speak here to God's heavenly presence woven through the fabric of our earthly cloth. In him we live and move and have our being, the Apostle Paul declares. The universe hangs on God. He has written our earthly stories on the foundational parchment of his heavenly presence. And this means that when Jesus teaches us as his followers to pray, God, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, he is teaching us to pray for the union of heaven and earth, the coming together of God's sphere with ours. This collision, which is a merger of creator and creation. When heaven meets earth, when the divine presence penetrates the fabric of our earthly existence, this is a holy space where the King of the universe is united with us as his bride. It is a space of joy where beauty is formed and new life emerges. Right? All right, Josh, well, what does it have to do with sex? Everything. All right. I would suggest to you, this reveals that all is full of love. This is the secret that sex reveals. It is a window that God has designed into the structure of creation to reveal something that is true about our Creator's heartbeat for us as His creation and the world that He has made, that love is the meaning of the world. Creation was made for diversity and union, and so were you. You were made for union with God and all the diversity and particularity of your being. You were made by love, for love, in love, the love of God. Every sunset is a reminder. Right? You don't need to have sex to experience this, but sex points towards this experience that you were meant to have. Right? The Bible has a high view of singleness, and so it's not saying, hey, you have to have sex to experience this, but this points to, God's designed it like a window, like an icon, like something that points to this greater reality that is true for all of us, single or married, widowed, divorced, alone, wherever you might be coming from. God's designed this as like a window into the structure and the truth of the Creator's heartbeat of meaning for His world. God made you for union with Him. The world around you, the very structure of the world around you bears witness. Now, there is a lie out there today. Some would say today that the world is meaningless. Many today feel that the world today is meaningless. A random accident that the sun will simply burn out one day as we descend into frozen darkness, but don't believe it, right? Nobody believes such things as sunset. At sunset, we're too enchanted by the glory. God's truth for sex is that it is a window into this truth about our world. And this can be hard to remember now when we hear of wars and rumors of wars on the news, when your best friend kind of stabs you in the back, when that diagnosis comes crashing in through the front door like a battering ram. But you know what I like to recommend doing in such times? Is get outside, go for a walk. Like look up at the mountains and even hike one if you can. Walk down by the riverside and the water where you see new life emerging. Go out and gaze like a child again upon the sunset and let the rhythms of creation remind you that the sun will rise again. Sex is holy in part because it's designed to point to such greater things, which raises the question for us is, do you treat sex as sacred? Do we treat it as something holy, sacred, with the respect it deserves, or do we treat it selfishly as just a personal plaything? Because if sex is an icon of creation, then treating it selfishly is essentially, it's kind of like taking a bulldozer to Michelangelo's David, right? Destroying the masterpiece or desecrating the masterpiece of a great artist. Don't dishonor something that God has designed to be beautiful. This also means that some of us, like you may feel like you're going against the tide of culture when you pursue and approach sex God's way. One man, one woman in marriage, committed, faithful, all that, right? You may feel like you're going against the tide of culture, but the reality is you are going with the grain of the universe. Like you are actually, to approach it God's way is to bear witness to this reality of the structure of creation in God's world. All right, let's get back to Genesis. So the Creator saves the best for last. Genesis 1 climaxes in a poem where God says, so God created mankind in His image, and in the image of God He created him, male and female He created them. That God creates humanity, male and female He created them. We are a fourth and final complementary pair. We are made with and for one another. I love the way that theologian N.T. Wright puts it. He says, the man and the woman together are a symbol of something which is profoundly true of creation as a whole. The coming together of male and female is itself a signpost pointing to that great complementarity of God's whole creation, of heaven and earth belonging together. Sex is a window into the structure of creation. Male and female are like a pint-sized portrait of heaven and earth. Right? a tiny template for our terrestrial home. All right, when I say that the sex is a window into the structure of creation, what do I mean by sex? Well, two things here. One, sex refers here to our sexed identity as male and female. That sex is not just something that we do, it's someone who we are. This means that we need both men and women to get the fullness of the image of God. If this room were full of only men, or if this room were full of only women, neither on their own would give us the most robust reflection of the Imago Dei, of God's divine reflection that He's designed us to bear in the world. Now, again, you don't need to, what this I think points to too, that sex, talking here about our identity as male and female, like God has designed us as male and female, you don't need to have sex to bear the image of God, right? Like the Bible has a very high view of singleness. Jesus was single and Paul was single, so if you are single, you are in good company. I love how Jesus is both like the great bachelor and the glorious groom, right? Jesus, as the great bachelor, he gave up sex and marriage and all that on a horizontal level in order as the glorious groom to lay down his life and give of himself for union with his bride on a vertical level. And essentially what that means for us is that you can have the reality without the sign. Like you can have the reality of union with God, union with your Creator, the greater thing that sex and marriage and all that was always designed to point to. You can have that without the smaller sign, right? You can get the movie without the sneak preview, so to speak. So, the Bible has a very high view of singleness. You don't need to have sex in order to bear the image. And sex speaks here to our sex identity as male and female. But the second thing that I mean here by sex is what most of us probably first think of, right? Afternoon delight, right? That sex is both a noun and a verb. And God's truth that we see here alluded to in Genesis 1 is that sex is sacred. Both of those are sacred. Both our sex identity as male and female is sacred, as is the sexual union of male and female, and that the convergence of man and woman is a window into the structure of our world that points to greater things. We find here that sex is diversity in union. God creates the diversity and distinctness of male and female who are able to come together into union to form family, form a new life, and that this union and this diversity are an icon of creation. They're a window into the structure of our world. All right, so let's talk about truth and lies now. We talked a bit about truth, how God's truth is He's designed sex as this window into the structure of creation. Now let's look at some of the lies. I believe that diversity and union, it helps explain some of the prohibitions in Scripture, some of the areas where God says, don't do that, right? And so let's look at two in particular. Jesus says that divorce violates the union side of this equation, whereas Paul says that same-sex sexual activity violates the diversity side of this equation. And both draw on Genesis 1 to make their point. And so let's start with Jesus on divorce. So in Matthew 19, Jesus says that divorce violates union. The problem here is that it violates the union side of the equation. So these legal scholars, they come up to Jesus and they ask him a question that we're still asking today. Hey, Jesus, is divorce okay for any and every reason? And that was a live topic back in the day. There were different traditions that approached divorce. Some were more lenient, some more stringent. And so they want to see, how is Jesus going to respond to this? And I love Jesus' response. He says this. He says, haven't you read? I love that. Like, haven't you read? Like, Jesus is chiding. I'm like, don't you guys read your Bibles, right? It's like, haven't you read that at the beginning, so he's going back to the beginning, back to Genesis, he says, at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female. And there he's quoting Genesis 1 that we just looked at, right? Genesis 1, that the beginning, the Creator made them male and female. And said, he goes on, and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So here now he's quoting Genesis 2. So he just goes back and he quotes both Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. He quotes Genesis 1 to highlight diversity. God made them male and female. And then he quotes Genesis 2 to highlight union, that they are able to come together and the two become one flesh. And he says that actually God is at work doing something here. He says, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Notice this is what God has joined together. I've officiated a lot of weddings, and I often like to tell the couple, like, I'm just a representative here for a greater reality. God is actually the officiant at your wedding. Jesus is going, God is actually, the one bringing these two together and making them one. Which is kind of strange to us because we tend to think, well, man, I ordered the flowers and I got the caterer and I, got the band and whatever, right? I thought I was doing the wedding. It's like Jesus is going, no, at a deeper level here, God, the creator of the universe, has designed the structure of creation in a way that he is the one who is taking these two and bringing them together. And through their sexual union, ideally in covenant, these two are becoming one. And Jesus therefore goes, this is sacred. So what God has joined together, what God has made one, do not separate. Do not tear it apart. Don't tear it asunder. Jesus is saying here that divorce, it violates union, and a union that's grounded in the structure of creation. They kind of come back at him. They're like, well, what about in the law? Moses said, da-da-da-da. And Jesus said, yeah, Moses made an exception because of your hardness of heart. But he goes back to creation, goes, but the ideal embedded in the structure of creation is that there is a permanence here, because this union is a true union that God has brought together. Jesus says divorce, it not only violates this union and the structure of creation, it violates an action of God, something that God has done and joined together. And it's essentially like you're dismantling an icon, Jesus says. This icon, like icons historically, they were meant to be like a window into greater reality. Jesus is going, God has made male and female and this union to be a window into this greater reality. And it's like divorce is dismantling and pulling apart this icon. And so I believe a lie in our culture is that divorce is no big deal, that it's not really a big thing. And yet I found that children often get the big deal that it is better than their parents. And so this is a quote I want to read from the book. But so when mom and dad talk about divorce, they tend to focus on the logistics. Who gets weekends and holidays, how to cover childcare, coordinate school drop-offs, finding the best counselor, and constructive activities to rebuild normalcy. But children are more perceptive. They often reach for words to describe something deeper, something tumbling beneath the surface like Leviathan. The union that brought them into existence is unstable, precarious, dissolving. Something more foundational is crumbling in the ground beneath their feet, a rupture rippling through the rafters of the ceiling overhead, a crack fissuring through the heavenly skies as the universe unravels around them. And they're right. If marriage is an icon, a window into the structure of creation, then divorce displays an architecture built for collapse, a universe where detachment, dissolution, and disintegration have the last word. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and a crumbling couple images the collapse of our cosmic home. It is a blueprint for a world where division has the final say. Though we were created for union, it is an image of a universe where togetherness yields to separation, communion gives way to isolation, and we wind up alone at the end. Divorce is an icon of hell. Picture that divorce pictures something. It pictures heaven and earth being pulled apart, torn apart. It pictures Christ and the church, that union dissolving, a Christ who abandons or betrays his church, or a church that ultimately is not secure in Christ. It preaches a false gospel that the union we were made for with God will one day be broken. Now, it's important to recognize here, just a word as a pastor, I know that divorce is a part of my story, not personally my parents, the family that I grew up in. I know for many of you here, maybe divorce has been I know that for many of us here, divorce has been a part of your story. And to be clear, what I'm not saying here, I'm not saying that there are never circumstances where divorce is permissible. Jesus goes on to give some. There are some circumstances, and I go more into that in the book, where divorce is permissible. And if you have been divorced, I'm not saying that there is no hope. Like Jesus didn't come to beat us up over our past, but to fight for our future. And the reality of grace is that God is a God who can restore and bring beauty out of the ashes and build us up. So all that to say, if divorce is a part of your story, the gospel is bigger. Jesus is stronger than that, and that doesn't have to define your story. And yet, if you have been divorced, or if divorce is a part of your story, I'm guessing that you felt the gravity and the weight of that experience. The Holmes-Ross stress scale used by the medical community ranks divorce as one of the highest things, like more stressful than finding out you have a terminal illness, more stressful than moving jobs, more stressful than, the only thing that really ranks higher on the scale is the actual death of one's spouse, which is crazy. The only thing that outranks the metaphorical death of one's spouse is the actual death of one's spouse. And why is that? Well, I would suggest it's because God has invested it with this sacred meaning, this value, this weight. The truth is that it's a lie to say it's no big deal. The truth is that it's been invested with this meaning and this weight by God, embedded in the structure of creation, and so we feel it. It's serious not just because of what it does to our spouse or our kids, though those are also massive, but also because of what it says about God and the stability of our future with Him. There's a sacred value there. Okay, so that's the union side of the equation. Now let's move to the diversity side of the equation. You guys all still tracking here? All right, sweet. Okay, so let's move to the diversity side of the equation. Similarly, Paul says that same-sex sexual activity violates the diversity side of the equation. In Romans 1, he gives it as a sign of the fall, of the impact of the fall on the world that we live in. He says that men and women have exchanged one another as sexual partners, women with women, men with men, and that is a sign of the impact of sin in the world, of the fall. In other words, there is a trading out on the diversity side of the equation. Now, a disclaimer, there's probably no more loaded conversation in our culture right now than the LGBT one, right? And so many voices are holding megaphones. And so two kind of things that I think are important to just say up front. First is that if you are here and you are attracted to the same sex, like, you need to know first and foremost, God loves you, God is for you, you have dignity, value, and worth, and great gifts that He has given you to give in His kingdom, to be a part of life together in community, and it's a kingdom where there are no second-class citizens, right? And so I know from a number of friends of mine, that I have a few friends who've experienced just brutal treatment at the hands of Christians in the past, and that should cause us to lament and weep, being spit upon, being called names, being kicked out of their homes, sometimes for nothing more than just grappling with desire. And if that's you, I want you to know that I'm sorry that that's happened to you. And so the second disclaimer along those lines would be that if you're straight, don't hate, right? Like, Jesus calls us to love and lay down our lives for one another and for His world. We're called not to burn people down with our words, but to build people up and to lay down our lives sacrificially for people in a world that God so radically loves. Now, I've found, however, that for friends of mine where this is a part of their story, where a desire for romance or sex with someone of the same sex, that what often they've told me, a buddy of mine was just texting this morning, that what often they've told me is that one of the most powerful things is seeing the beautiful realities and the true realities that God has designed sex to point to. That's helped motivate, inspire faithfulness. And so let's take a look here at Romans 1. What's interesting, I think, is we have to zoom out and go, what's the bigger context of Romans 1? And what we find is that Paul roots his argument in Genesis 1, in the structure of creation. Like Jesus, he goes back and roots his discussion in Genesis. We see this in a couple different ways. One is in Romans 1, Paul is in this section of the passage. He's talking about how God is the creator who has revealed himself. Only we exchange the creator for created things. And it's interesting, he uses 7 key words that are drawn directly from Genesis 1. And so if you look at Genesis 1 on the left-hand side, where God says, let us make mankind, or anthropo, in our image, our icona, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish and the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock, all the wild animals, over all the reptiles that move along the ground. Those 5 words, then it goes on to use the word for male and female. Similarly, Romans 1 is drawing on 7 of those words, like they exchange the glory of the immortal God for images, ikonos, and the likeness of mortal mankind and birds and animals and reptiles, and goes on to use the same words for male and female, exchanging one another as sexual partners. And these echoes would have been obvious to first century audience, right, that knew their Bibles. It's kind of like when a politician today stands up and says, I have a dream. Like everyone knows they're echoing or alluding to, like Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous speech. Similarly here, when Paul is giving these echoes, these 7 words, it alludes back to Genesis 1. Paul also goes on and he says, even their women, that's the same word as Genesis 1, exchange natural sexual relations for unnatural ones in the same way the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. And here, that language of natural and unnatural is a third way that Paul's alluding to Genesis 1 and the structure of creation. That phrase, natural and unnatural, was used to talk about sex in the ancient Greco-Roman world. It was used to mean one thing and one thing alone, was same-sex sexual activity. So they had other words for like paiderastis. They could refer to like pedophilia, like an adult with a younger person. They had different words for like the oppressive dynamics of like a master with slave. But Paul is highlighting consensual same-sex sexual activity. We know it's consensual. He talks about women with women, which would have been that. And he emphasizes the active role of both males in the partner, right, for one another. And so Paul is saying that he's rooting his critique not in power dynamics in culture, but in structural dynamics in creation, right? And saying that something is being violated here. Now, I would suggest to you that that because Paul sees same-sex sexual activity as violating the diversity side of the equation, that this speaks to a beautiful gospel reality that God is pro-diversity. That God is pro-diversity, that sex embodies an iconic diversity that's designed to be a window into the structure of creation in the world that we live in. That the biological reality of our anatomical particularity speaks to this beauty of God's design for his good world. I like how Rachel Gilson, a same-sex attracted author, she puts it this way. She says, God has designed sex to communicate about big, beautiful things. God's sex ethic isn't primarily a bunch of no's. God designed sex difference and sexual union for some very big yeses. Yes to diversity. Yes to new life. A marriage cannot rightly depict God's relationship with his people if it lacks faithfulness or pleasure or fruitfulness or sex difference. The metaphor demands it. What she's saying is that sex and marriage and all this, it's designed like a metaphor. It's designed to point to a bigger reality of the life that we were made for with God, for all of us. And this life we were all made for with God, whether single or married or wherever we're at in life, this life that we were made for with God is a life marked by God's faithfulness to us. It's marked by the joy and the pleasure that we have in life with Christ as his bride. It's marked by the fruitfulness of our life in the Spirit, and it's marked by a sex difference, right? Like our sex difference speaks to this differentiation that God and us, we're not like each other. Christ and his church are distinct, and yet we're able to come together to become one in salvation. So the problem with same-sex sexual activity, according to Romans 1, is that it violates diversity. That diversity is traded for uniformity, complementarity swapped out for similarity. It becomes a window into a world of same with same rather than difference in harmony. It's a picture of earth above and earth below, which is a cave, rather than heaven above and earth below. It's unable to bear witness to the beauty and life that we're designed for in our life with God and that our world is structured. More significantly, it's unable to bear witness to Christ and the church, who are distinct yet able to come together in salvation as one. So same-sex sexual activity is an icon of anti-diversity. Now, I recognize that may sound ironic at first, because when we think of diversity today in the context of sex, we tend to think of a diversity of desire, like the different types of experiences we might like to have, or the gender or the number of partners. But what I'm talking about here is, I believe, something that is actually deeper than our appetites, a diversity that is deeper than our appetites or our preferences. We're talking here about a bodily diversity embedded in our blood and our bone, what the philosophers might call an ontological diversity. Now, humans are diverse in all sorts of ways. Obviously, like some like spicy food, some like mild, some like rap, some like country. We're diverse in our skin tone, ethnicity, and background. And God's kingdom is a kingdom of every nation, tribe, and tongue. So we're diverse in all sorts of ways. But Genesis 1 points us to the deepest diversity running at the heart of the human race. The one that actually generates life and brings forth humanity is this diversity and distinction of male and female. Okay, well, Josh, is this just saying the parts don't fit? No, it's saying that they're not just parts, right? It's saying that our bodies are sacred, that God has designed us as like an iconic window into the structure of creation, the nature of his world. If divorce preaches a world that's destined to fall apart, same-sex sexual activity proclaims one that cannot come together. It cannot truly come together. Now, we wouldn't be doing justice to Romans 1 if we stopped here. The bigger picture of Romans 1 is that we are all in the same boat. Paul is building his argument to show how, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I go more in the book into what he's kind of the structure of the passage, but his big emphasis is not on this. His big emphasis, he goes on right after this to describe this laundry list of like 21 sins that are like stuff everybody, that we all do. And so Paul's bigger picture here is that when it comes to the brokenness related to the fall, like we are all in the same boat together in this. When people will ask me, Josh, do you think homosexuality is a sin, which is a pastor I tend to get asked a lot, my response is usually, well, actually, I think American sexuality is sin, right? Like the problem runs much deeper into kind of the way that we think about it, the way that we approach it, what our hopes and desires, from the proliferation of pornography to the skyrocketing rise in premarital sex to the horrific realities of adultery and abortion and other things. Like there is a reality that we are all implicated in, and that's just the sexual stuff, right? We're all implicated in the bigger picture by the fall. So if you think about like the Titanic, I would suggest obsessing too much on same-sex sexual activity for us as Christians or as a church, it can kind of be like getting obsessed, focusing on a leaky faucet on the Titanic. It's like, yes, it's true, there's water coming into the ship from there, but the bigger problem is we've got a breach in the hull, right? The Titanic is American sexuality. Like our picture, our understanding, our approach to sex in American culture has become divorced and distanced from God's truth for the world, has become saturated with lies, that it's kind of those same kind of lies that Elisa was speaking to earlier. It's all about you and you do you, and that's rather than going, no, there's something beautiful and sacred and holy here that's designed to be this window into the Creator's heartbeat for his creation, the Creator's heartbeat for you. And we see how I believe that the beautiful things that God's designed sex to proclaim, the truths that he's designed it to represent, help explain why the distortions are a problem, right? So if God's designed sex and marriage and all for this union, this covenantal lifelong union, it helps explain why divorce is so tragic. It tears apart the fabric of this picture of Christ and his church united together forever. As we've seen, it helps explain the problem with same-sex sexual activity, as it can't bear witness to the diversity that can come together to bring forth this true union that has the potential to bring forth new life. But it demonstrates the problem with a lot of other things too. So if we look at like adultery violates the faithfulness of God, like God's covenantal love, that God, that God is faithful to us. He will never betray us. And so adultery not only hurts your spouse, that is horrible, but it also speaks a lie about God. It was one of the prophets' primary images for sin and rebellion, because they're going, man, you were made for union with God as his people. And what adultery does is it cracks and distorts that image of the life that we were made for with God. It helps illuminate the problem with premarital sex, is that premarital sex fails to reflect God's covenantal love, that Jesus commits to you before he unites with you. He lays down his life on the cross saying, I will be with you through thick and thin, through hell or high water. Come goodness, on your good days and your bad days, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, and even death won't be able to separate us, because I'm committed to you forever. that Jesus commits to us before he unites with us, and so our union with him takes place in a context of security in his covenantal love. And premarital sex violates that image. It fails to reflect the security of commitment that we have in Christ's covenantal love for us. Abortion, similarly, it violates the life-giving nature of this union. Like the union with Christ is designed to bring forth the new life through his Spirit. And so it helps explain why there's one of the reasons, right? Like why there is a tragedy that takes place when that life is terminated. All right, well, bigger picture though, let's land on the beauty here. Let's go back to diversity in union. I believe this phrase, that sex is diversity in union, and this phrase, for me, it's I believe diversity in union, it speaks to the heart of the gospel and the hope of the world. What do you mean by that, Josh? Like, how is diversity in union the hope of the world? Well, if you were to ask me, hey, Josh, what is the greatest hope the gospel has to bring to our world today? I just might say diversity in union. Here's what I mean. That if we go, we've been in the beginning of the biblical story, Genesis 1, if we go to the end of the biblical story, in Revelation 21 and 22, what we find at the end of the story is a wedding. What do weddings celebrate? They celebrate union, the two coming together as one, and this wedding is no different. That the wedding at the end of the world celebrates the union of heaven and earth as God and humanity dwell together forever as one. God will be with them, and he will be with them. They will be his people, and he will be their God. And it's got all these other diversities too that we see at this wedding at the end of the world. It's the union of East and West as the nations come streaming to bring their riches and glory to be reconciled in his kingdom. Reconciled, bringing their diversity into union. It's union not only of heaven and earth and East and West, but of good folks and bad folks, where the moralists and the murderers, the Pharisees and the prodigals are able to come together by nothing but the grace of Christ under the blood of the Lamb. It's also the union of weak and strong, where the weak have every tear wiped away from their eyes by a compassionate God, and the strong of the kings come and lay their crowns before Jesus. And so the wedding at the end of the world, Revelation 21:22 says, it is a wedding of diversity and union, of the union of heaven and earth and east and west and good folks and bad folks and weak and strong. That is the truth of God's hope for the world, is that this is coming. Sex is designed to look not only back to the structure of creation and up to the world that we live in today, but to look forward to God's future for the world. God loves taking the two and making them one, and I'd suggest this is because God is diversity in union, right? Like God loves diversity in union because God is diversity in union. The Trinity, that our God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, an eternal communion of love before the foundation of the world. That the Trinity is not some weird math equation, but a wondrous proclamation that God is love, that you and I are made relationally by a relational God. Jesus is also diversity in union. This phrase speaks to Jesus, who brings the greatest of polarities together in his very person of divinity and humanity. That when we were falling into the cavernous chasm of sin, Jesus, like Superman, he grabbed hold of our frailty and pulled us to himself like his mighty chest, bringing our frail humanity in touch with his divinity through the incarnation to heal and reconcile and make us whole. He is our great mediator who brings together heaven and earth. The two become one in his flesh. And we become one through his flesh. That the church is diversity and union. We are one body with many parts, one kingdom comprised of every nation, tribe, and tongue. We are animated by one Spirit, manifesting his presence in our midst through a diversity of gifts. The church is diversity in union. And so sex as diversity and union, it is a sign we see here of creation and of salvation, of the Trinity, of the church, and of the coming kingdom. This fills sex with transcendence and meaning and power. It is a sign of the gospel and the hope of the world. This means it is something that is sacred, to be approached with reverence, treated as holy. This is a bigger vision, not a smaller vision of sex, because Unlike that Rolling Stone quote mentioned earlier, like it's not like existentially meaningless. It's actually speaks to the power of a greater story in which we're found, which fills it with transcendence and meaning and hope. So if we go back to sunset, I suggest to you that there is a reason why my neighborhood comes out at sunset. There's a reason why we are drawn to such a place of splendor. It is a sign of something greater. It is a sign, like sex is, of God's desire for union with his people, of Christ's commitment to his church, and the joy and the beauty and the life that emerge when, in this greater sense, the two become one, when our lives are united and joined by God. So the next time someone asks you why sunsets are so beautiful, you can tell them that they are prophets proclaiming a greater reality. You were made for diversity and union, that you were made for union with God. Thank you. All right, I think we've got until 11:45, so I think we're going to do some questions if there are any. I'm sure there's no questions, just a light, easy topic. Let's see, was there a microphone, is that right? Sorry, my eyesight's not the greatest. It's looking at me. Or did you want to run a mic, or should I can hear, and I can repeat the question? That's all. Awesome, thank you. All right, no question off limits, though I may not have any good answers. And there may be some younger folks in the audience too, so just knowing the topic, I don't know, be sensitive in how you ask. Oh, great, excellent, yes.
So if sex was not made for pleasure, like you said, then why do we feel pleasure? Because you know how you said it was made, God made it for us. I can't remember the phrase. What phrase did you use again?
Oh, yeah, for diversity and union, that one? Or yes.
Yeah, then why do we still feel pleasure if that's not the purpose?
Great question. That is an excellent question. So he said, okay, if the purpose is to speak to these greater things like diversity and union and all, then why, if it's not made for pleasure, then why is it still pleasurable? And I'm really glad you asked that, because just to clarify, I wouldn't want to be misheard there. I would not want to say that it's not made for pleasure at all. I do believe pleasure is a part of the picture, but it's one part of a much bigger picture. So kind of like that Rachel Gilson quote I said, where she kind of says hey, there's a bunch of different aspects here. You've got faithfulness, it's designed for faithfulness. You've got life, new life. It's designed for life-giving presence to bring new life. You've got pleasure and joy. I believe that at its heart, I would suggest that sex is designed to be mutual self-giving, which brings pleasure to one another as a piece of that. And even that, I would suggest, reflects something of the joy that God desires, that in our union with Christ as his church and our union with God, it actually brings joy. It actually fills our hearts and our lives with joy. And so I think that the pleasure of sex is itself actually a good thing that's designed to speak to that greater reality. But what I did want to say, I think maybe where that's coming from, it's a great question. What I did want to say is that more that I think we can have a self-centered approach to sex in our culture at times, right? This is ultimately only about pleasure and nothing more. And therefore, the only thing that's really required is consent, because at its worst, there can kind of be lurking behind, I'm going to use the other person to give myself pleasure, rather than I'm going to give myself to the other person that they might receive pleasure and that I might receive pleasure in turn, and not where we're simply using one another, but in a context of covenant faithfulness where there's relationship and security and commitment and where our lives are becoming one. So that's an excellent question. Yeah, so I want to say, yes, pleasure, just not a self-interested pleasure or a self-centered pleasure that's only using the other person for that, rather than receiving pleasure in a context of covenant where you're giving yourselves to one another. Yeah. Another question? Oh, great.
Hello. Okay. there's been a lot of controversy, at least with the Catholic Church, where self-pleasuring was a sin, and then they reverted back to it's not a sin. And I've kind of got what you've said, but I'd like for you to talk about that topic of self-pleasuring and how God would look at that.
Great. Excellent questions. The question of self-pleasuring, like how would God look at that? Well, one angle, I think there's two angles I like to take. Maybe the first one is just to go, I think that, and I haven't seen, so I have read up on a lot of Catholic authors and Protestant and Orthodox kind of across the board, and I haven't seen yet where they've actually said that that self-pleasuring is okay, you know? We're talking about masturbation here, in case anyone was unclear. But here's a few thoughts that I think are helpful. First off, where I would want to go is Matthew 5, where Jesus kind of talks about the power of lust. And he kind of goes, man, you think just because you haven't committed adultery that you're okay. But I tell you, even if you've looked at another woman lustfully, even if you have, and I think what Jesus is saying is, like, the sparks that set our world aflame are rooted in the human heart. And so where I'd want to go even deeper than the act of self-pleasuring or of masturbation would even be like the sparks of lust, that Jesus is going, man, there's a wicked root there. There's a problem that is in a lot of it. Like a lot of us, we all wrestle with some vices, and lust is a key one that many of us wrestle with, right, as people. So I think one thing that we have to take seriously in our lives as we're pursuing holiness and life with Christ is taking account of our lust and seeking to mortify that, like to bring that before Jesus and let his grace kind of put out the flames, so to speak, and make us whole. But a second observation I'd say is I think this has become more prevalent even with just the skyrocketing rise of pornography in our culture, right? Like that this is more accessible as ever, like it's as close as the phone in your pocket. It's more addictive than ever. Like there's an endless genre of genres that can cater to every fantasy, and often a lot of the best today, it's not a Christian group, but if you go to, I think it's Porn is the New Drug. I'm trying to remember the name of their website, but if you go to Porn is the New Drug, or search that, they've got great resources just showing the harmful effects of pornography, like on the brain, on your development, on your relationships, on all that kind of stuff. So the best up-to-date research on that. But where I would say is that, it's interesting. If we think of the icon, if you will, I call it kind of like God's design, that there is this, how deep do I want to go here? That there's husband, wife, and child, right? The three. And I get into the book in some ways, like how this reflects in some ways, like there's a reflection of the life of God as triune and all, right? So the husband, wife, and the child, that I think one of the challenges we see with contraception or abortion, I'm not saying you can't ever, there's not an ethical use of contraception, but one of the challenges that as a mindset in our society, we've often cut off sex from the procreative, generative, life-giving dimension. And so in our eyes, like, okay, that's kind of an optional add-on. It's not inherent in the nature of sex itself. And then if we think of pornography and masturbation, it's cutting off the unitive dimension of sex, right? Like it's actually having sex with yourself, so to speak, satiating desire with someone who's not even in the room, right? And so if there's a unitive dimension to sex, husband and wife, and there's a procreative dimension to sex, the life-giving nature of the child, then a certain contraceptive mindset in our culture cuts off sex from new life, from the procreative dimension, and pornography, masturbation, all those kind of things like cut off sex from the unitive dimension. And I feel like the danger there ultimately is like we can have a mindset or approach that's ultimately almost caving back in on ourselves. It's like a self-serving kind of approach and mindset rather than the mutual self-giving that God's designed the life for marital love and the family to represent. I don't know, that may have been a long-winded answer, not quite another direction, but yeah, great question. Is there another? Sorry, 1 second. I think they're trying to pick up the questions on the recording, so I'll wait for okay, and then this person next. All right.
You talk about God's design for sex bringing new life. My question is, between a husband and a wife, can you reconcile contraception with God's design for sex?
great question. Yeah, so question, can you reconcile contraception with God's design for sex? I believe so. So I'm Protestant, but I think there are some good uses and some not good uses, right? And so again, I'm thinking how much detail do I want to go into here, But I think that big picture, that I like the way John Frame, theologian, puts it, like I believe there can be good uses, but that it's probably overused at times for the wrong reasons, And so what I would say is like unhealthy uses, maybe that, like unhealthy uses would be to, a healthy use, I think, would be to steward the size of one's family, potentially, right? Like you think back in the day, Genesis 1, God creates humanity, be fruitful and multiply. Throughout most of history, having a large family was a huge blessing. It says God blessed humanity, be fruitful and multiply. And it's still a blessing. I love my kids more than anything in the world, right? But in a very concrete way, like your kids were like your 401k to help you, when you retired. They were your labor, to help work the land. Like agricultural society, having a large family was a major bonus, right? But today it's hard to raise 15 kids in New York City, right? So I think the question becomes, man, is there a legitimate use, things like urbanization and the time and place that we're in today? I go into more depth in this with some resources related to the book, but is there a legitimate use to steward the size of one's family in our time and day? And like most Protestants, I believe the answer to that would be yes. But then if you push back on the other side, where some of the critiques of contraception would be is like there can be a mindset, what you might call a contraceptive mindset, that cuts off, that can begin to think like, hey, this is just about the two of us without this ideal ordering towards life and family and fruitfulness and all that. That's also part of the design. Like it speaks to the fruitfulness of life in God's kingdom through his Spirit and all. And yet even in so let's say, for example, the Roman Catholic Church would teach that artificial contraception is off limits, but would still allow for what we call natural family planning, that like just avoiding sex on days where the couple would be more fertile. And my 2 cents on that is like, well, once you've accepted the end, like the goal, that the end game or the goal is to have sex but avoiding having children, now the question in my mind is just, are you willing to use technology to get there or not? Like you can walk to the store or you can take your car, but you're both striving towards the same destination. And my sense, in a lot of Protestant ethicist people would go that there's a legitimate use of contraception, like that once that end is in place, it's simply the real question then becomes a question of technology. Like, is it okay to use technology rather than just natural means to get there? And I believe that there is. But I think a healthy use might be stewarding the size of one's family in our day and age, or the timing, that you can reasonably care for and provide for and all. But I think unhealthy uses would be, as is very common in our culture, to avoid commitment, to avoid marriage, to avoid those things, to be able to play the field, for example, or whatever it would be unhealthy uses. Yes. Is there? Yeah, there we go.
Hi. I don't know if this is on. Okay, it is. Hi. My question is on sex as being unity. Of course, it's the tool, but a tool can also be used to destroy. Yes. So in a marriage where someone is withholding sex and hurting their marriage, or maybe even to the line of consent, like maybe they are uncomfortable with it and they feel like they're guilted into sex. Like, yes, it's a marriage, but also there's like mucky waters where that goes.
Yes.
Time does decrease the frequency of it, but then there's also that weird moment where it's like you have to kind of navigate those waters.
Yes. No, it's a great question. So, the one hand, if I hear the question right, it's like, man, there's this beauty to sex in marriage and the husband and wife and all that, but there's also times where sex can be really difficult. Maybe for one person, it might be like they're withholding sex as almost like a punishment or something, or the other person is maybe being, worst case scenario, abusive, or like really just demanding or whatever. And so, great question. So I would say even within marriage, there are healthy and unhealthy ways to navigate your life together when it comes to sex, right? So one of the things I do in the book, I don't have time to go into this in real depth, but is looking at, Paul says in Ephesians 5, the two will become one flesh. He goes on, and he's talking about marriage there, and one flesh is like sexual union, the two become one flesh. And he goes on and says, this is a great mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. Now, Paul's saying that sexual union is designed to display something of Christ and the church. Now, I think that Christ and the church, that relationship helps illuminate what a healthy experience of sex should look like, right? So, within marriage. So, the language I use in the book is generosity and hospitality, right? Like that there's both a generosity of self-giving. You think about generosity, you're giving of your time, your money, your resources. At a deeper level, you're giving of yourself. And what greater form of self-giving is there than sexual union, where you're giving one another, and particularly for the husband, even within the other, like your very self. Then you think of like hospitality, like welcoming the other, receiving them into your home, receiving them into your place of kind of circle of intimacy and the warmth of your place of dwelling together. And what greater form of hospitality is there than in marriage and in sexual union, where, particularly for the wife, receiving the husband not only to herself, but within herself, right? And how that dynamic of generosity and hospitality actually speaks to, I think, an iconic design, in the same way that Christ gave himself generously to lift up and please and save and all, to lift up his church. And similarly for the church, that we welcome and receive Christ within ourselves, that his divine life takes root within the bride of Christ with his word and his spirit, his presence that can grow to bring forth new life in us and through us. Now that means that there are tragic inversions or distortions, right? You think about at an extreme level, rape is horrible. Sexual assault, any form of sexual assault, it's converting generosity into a form of theft, right? Like it is twisting the iconic design and taking from the other person, right? And that, rather than self-giving, it's a taking for the self, and it's destructive. It violates the other made in the image of God. But I'd say that's very extreme level, but even in lesser extremes, there can be using the other for self-gratification, even in marriage, right? And that I think the gospel actually calls, just speaking generally, I know, well, it's 1 minute, so I don't want to go too far down into that, all right? Okay, but basically, I think you're exactly right, and I think part of the goal in marriage, that there's complicated, it can be like, there are relational dynamics and all, but the goal is to actually be moving towards one another over time and figuring out relationally how you can best love and serve each other to build up one another and experiencing that union together in your marriage. With that said, it's 11:45, I believe now, it's 11:44, 1 minute, so... but thank you so much for being here.